Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and by ePayment America, providing businesses an e-suite of flexible and efficient electronic payment programs through innovative technology, secure transaction processing, 24/7 customer support, and field technicians in the Mid-South and nationwide. Details at 855-927-9925.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Malika Anderson of the Achievement School District, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Superintendent of the Achievement School District, Malika Anderson. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. You are 4 years with, is that right? 4 years with the Achievement School District.
4 years, since February 2012.
Right. And 4 weeks as the superintendent, replacing Chris Barbick, who has been on the show, frequent watchers of the show. He's been on from the very beginning. But let's go ahead and step back a second and talk for a second. Give me, what is the Achievement School District? And then I'll tell you a preview. I'm going to follow up and ask, what is it not? And what are the biggest misconceptions? But let's start with what the Achievement School District is.
Sure. So the Achievement School District, or the ASD as I'm going to call it, and it's called out there, is a statewide school district that is tasked with taking schools that are in the bottom 5% in the state in terms of performance and making them better. And we do that through direct intervention in the schools that we serve and through partnership and some external pressure for local school districts to turn their schools around that are on the priority list.
And there are about 20-something schools in Memphis under the ASD?
There are 27 schools in Memphis and 2 in Nashville.
And 2 in Nashville. What is the biggest misconception? And I say that against a backdrop that you are very aware of. Maybe, I don't know how many viewers are. There's a lot of pressure on the ASD right now. The Black Caucus up in the legislature would like to pause the efforts. Some would, I think, would like to dismantle the efforts, bluntly, of the ASD, feeling that a whole lot of criticisms, which I'll try to walk through on their behalf and you can address them. But what, from your point of view, is the biggest or some of the biggest misconceptions about the ASD?
I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that the Achievement School District is like any other school district around the state, or just like Shelby County Schools, and that we should be treated like and talked about as though we are one monolithic organization. The ASD is growing, or the ASD is not. The ASD is performance, or the ASD is not. The ASD is an organization that approves independent, nonprofit, local operators to serve schools. And so we should be talking about the ASD as a portfolio of networks of schools, and how those networks of schools are doing should be at the forefront of these conversations.
Okay, Bill.
And in the last 4 years, we've now seen results on several fronts, because I think initially the list of bottom 5% schools was supposed to be shuffled again, so to speak, after 3 years. Instead, it was after 2 years. And of course, we had the Vanderbilt study, which was a comparison to some degree of ASD schools and I-zone schools, which just recently amped up the conversation quite a bit. Talk a little bit about the results and what we've seen, and how you think we should judge those results when it comes to the Achievement School District.
Sure. So the Achievement School District has a pretty intense school performance framework. I mean, that's how we hold our schools accountable, whether we are directly operating them or we are serving them through our charter partners or our contract operators. We have indicators that say that schools are improving the proficiency of students. That means that whether or not students are learning on grade level, how fast they're growing, how we are closing the achievement gap between certain subgroups like students with disabilities, et cetera, how we're preparing kids for college. We look at a host of items that we think say this school is well on its way to performing significantly better. And as part of that internal review, we supplement it with external research, such as that which the Vanderbilt study did. And we're looking at other kinds of research as well, both qualitative and quantitative. And the Vanderbilt study found that priority school students are performing 4 times faster than their peers across the state because of the efforts of the ASD and the I-Zone. iZones across the state, and that Shelby County Schools iZone is doing very well, which we are applauding and want to continue to support, and that it is too early at this time to make any conclusions about the impact of the ASD, given that we have so few schools that have more than 3 years of performance. And so we are going to continue to use the kind of research that we get from Vanderbilt and other partners, as well as internal analysis to determine how we are best serving schools and what to continue to do.
Let me interrupt, just so people who aren't as close to this, the difference between an iZone school in Shelby County and a regular school.
Innovation Zone schools are part of the Shelby County Schools
Right.
system. When the legislature set up the Achievement School District, they basically created ASD schools and iZone schools for the bottom 5% of schools in the state in terms of student achievement.
And the iZone schools are still controlled by, say, Dorsey Hobson, and
Yes.
they are under the umbrella of the local school board and so on.
Right.
But kind of approach it was somewhat similar to the
But
ASD.
they don't use charter
But they don't use
schools.
charter schools. Okay, go ahead with your question.
Which brings me to my next point. How have you seen the relationship with the charter schools that you use, the charter organizations, change over these last 4 years? Because you've learned a lot in 4 years of having the ASD.
How have we seen the relationships among the charters, or between the ASD and the charters? or
Between
what are
the
you thinking?
ASD and the charters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the relationship from the very beginning was one of partnership, and we're doing this together, and what do we need to create in terms of the environment for success for all of our charters and direct run schools that we treat like charters, because they all have autonomy, need to be successful. And I think that going forward, based on the lessons that we've learned about how ingrained some of the systemic forces are that are creating the conditions for failure, not just in schools that are in the Achievement School District, but schools that are on the priority list in Memphis and across the state, that we have to not just kind of work in an insular way, ASD and charters, but work with the local school districts, work with local partners, leverage the resources of the Department of Education and other statewide supporters to bring the kind of resources and support that are necessary to support all of the schools that are on the priority list, regardless of whether or not they're operated by an ASD charter or Shelby County Schools iZone.
In terms of how many schools are in the bottom 5%?
There are 85 schools statewide. There are
Yeah.
57 in Memphis. So most of the schools that are on the priority list are
But
in
when
Memphis.
this started, that bottom 5% was 90% Memphis, right?
It was about 85%. Yeah, 69 of the 85 schools were in Memphis 2 years
Okay,
ago.
so that number is coming down somewhat
Yes,
in terms
yes.
of, okay. Let me go through, I think I said this before the show, I was in Nashville this week at the legislature. I was cornered by some legislators from the Memphis area who, not knowing that you were going to be on the show, wanted to talk, and because it's been news up there, and there's some local school board members about criticisms of the ASD.
Right.
One is that it takes money out of the school system, and that it leaves, my word not theirs, robs the existing local school system of money it needs to educate kids. Does it take money out of the school system?
I think that it takes money to support the students that we are serving. So if the system is considered the students, then no, it doesn't take money out of the system, because the money follows the kids. And so long as the students are being served in SCS, they receive the funds. If they're being served elsewhere, including the ASD, then the funds will follow the student. In terms of taking money from an administrative system that provides kind of oversight for those schools, yes, it does take funds. It takes funds from the local district, and there are some changes that will need to be made on the district level. And I know that takes time. I know that we can't do kind of an immediate shrinkage, to match where the funding is going.
Right. The other big one that is thrown out is criticism of the ASD is accountability. That the ASD is not accountable to anyone. They are autonomous. They can do what they want, and they don't have to answer to anyone. My words, not theirs, but that kind of tone. And you've heard these criticisms.
I've heard that.
Who are you and your staff accountable to?
So first of all, the Achievement School District as a district is held to the same state accountability as any other school district, including Shelby County Schools. So we receive the state's grades in terms of performance on growth and achievement. So that State accountability applies to the Achievement School District. I am personally accountable to the Commissioner of Education, Candace McQueen, and to the Governor, Governor Haslam.
Right. Another thing, and we talked a little bit over the show, and Chris Barbick had talked about this over the years, that look, this is a very Memphis-focused start, but this is not a Memphis program.
Right.
And it took a few years, but some Nashville schools got taken, and some other schools. I don't know if there are other schools besides Memphis and Nashville in that bottom 5% at this point, but
There are.
Okay, by definition, the bottom 5% could include anyone. I mean, it can include
absolutely.
schools all over the state. Is that changing the dynamics in the legislature of legislators from areas who thought this was a, quote, Memphis problem, suddenly seeing that their schools might get taken over by your district?
Right. So when there, at the beginning of this in 2012, as Bill said, when there were 16, or I think as you said, when there were 69 schools of the 85 that were on the priority list statewide that were in Memphis, it made perfect sense for the Achievement School District to come and focus first where there was the highest concentration of schools. 90% of schools were here in Memphis. And then 2 years later, when the list was rerun and we saw a significant and very fabulous reduction in the number or proportion of schools that are on the priority list in Memphis move elsewhere to, say, Nashville and further east. Our attentions are now starting to shift in that direction to make sure that wherever the need is, the ASD is focusing. And so, yes, we're hearing from legislators and from community leaders and others across the state who now are asking more pointed questions around what does this mean for me and my students.
And are they welcoming it?
Honestly, there are a few in a couple of cities that are welcoming us behind the scenes. There are some tricky political dynamics associated with this, but I would say Nashville, not yet.
Yeah, and is the opposition, they'll go to Bill, but is the opposition the same things that were heard here, that, wait, you're taking over our school, what are you doing, give us another chance? Who are these charter people? I mean, is
Give
it
us
those?
more time, right? What about the teachers? What about the funding that will be lost? We're already struggling. Can you just provide us with the funding, that we would receive for the students that we'd be serving? Those are certainly the concerns and the conversations that we're beginning to have with them to make sure they're clear about what the opportunities are.
Yep.
But it seems as if the term takeover always produces some kind of visceral reaction, at least questions about how does this work, even though the school's the school's physical location is still where it is, obviously. Is that always going to be a factor in this, or is there a point at which that doesn't become an issue for parents?
I do think that it's always going to be a factor because it feels like something is being taken, when the quote state comes in. I will tell you though that part of my emphasis over the next several years is being more intentional with local school communities, including parents and business leaders and others, faith leaders, around what this partnership actually should look like in terms of empowering local voice in a way that currently does not exist when the school is in its local LEA because of how decisions are made. And that takes time. So will it always be like this? For the next couple of years, probably, but we are working toward redefining what turnaround looks like with local voice at the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible that we will see the autonomy in ASD schools and in iZone schools become a school system-wide phenomenon at some point?
Well, maybe not the full autonomy that the iZones and the ASD have, but I do absolutely see a trend toward providing principals with more autonomy around their hiring, around the programs that they use in their schools. I know that Metro Nashville Public Schools, for example, has initiatives in place already to begin to roll that out more broadly. And I think that would be welcome by other school leaders in local districts.
I mean, one of you, just for some perspective, the number of schools in Shelby County, how many? Do you know, Bill? Or do you know? I shouldn't have put you on spot.
They're about 200.
Is it about 200?
Close to 200,
Countywide,
right?
about 200 with
About
all
200.
with the 6 suburban and
And how many
Shelby County
iZone schools? I should have done this before the show, I apologize, but it's in the 10 to 20 range.
It's just below 20, maybe
Just
17,
below
18.
Okay,
Yep.
so between iZone and the ASD, that's about 50 schools right now. So it's about a quarter, give or take. Is there a funding difference? I mean, does an iZone school have more or less or the same money that the ASD school has?
iZone schools have the same, if not more, funding than ASD schools.
And then an ASD middle school versus a regular Shelby County school middle school, is the funding the same?
An ASD school and an iZone school both have access to school improvement grant funds or iZone funds that would exceed that which SCS schools that are not in the iZone have.
Right.
Same per pupil state and local funding, but there are other grants that the Department of Ed provides.
And that some of this comes back to the amount per pupil that travels with the child, which is what? What is that number right now?
It's a little less than 9,000.
A little less than 9,000, and then you get some other money from other sources that go on top of that 9,000 per student. Okay.
From the Department of Ed provides school improvement grant funds specifically around supporting the turnaround efforts in these identified schools.
Okay.
And those are equal across the ASD and the iZone.
Okay, back to Bill.
In terms of the relationship with the charter schools, some of the charter organizations, in particular Yes Prep, which I think not this past school year, but the year before, basically backed away from coming into this particular process. Yes Prep, as an example, had a very ambitious scale for how many schools they wanted to try to do here in Memphis within the ASD and outside of the ASD. Is that a problem, or is that the nature of the charter school business to scale up to that level? And should we be concerned about it?
I wouldn't be concerned about it. The growth plans of our operators are well vetted in terms of both sustainability and are always predicated on the performance of the network. So regardless of how large a charter operator or a school district, the Achievement School District, projects to grow, it always, every year, is dependent on how our schools perform. So provided that we are all in agreement that performance should determine which schools we are serving and how many we're serving, I think that the growth should not be a concern to folks.
Do the charter operators always know what a unique situation this is in terms of education reform here compared to the other places that they're in?
That has been something that we have learned, most definitely. I think that there was a presumption that some of the successes that our operators have experienced in other parts of the country and in Tennessee, in the cities that we're serving, in open enrollment charters, could more easily be transferred into turnaround schools than they have been. And so we are now clearer about what the underlying supports and challenges are that we need to address to make it possible and easier for operators to be able to translate that success in that environment to the success in these turnaround schools.
You said something about open enrollment, and that is nationally and locally, that can be a criticism of charter schools that, well, the charter school does better because they can just throw kids out and make it the non-charter public schools problem. How do charter schools in the ASD work in terms of the authority or the latitude to just get rid of problem kids and throw them back into the big pool, as it were, to be ugly?
So I want to clarify something. So in terms of open enrollment, what I was referring to was the ability of charter schools to be able to enroll any students. They don't have zoned students like neighborhood schools do.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
In the Achievement School District, our charter schools are zoned schools. The students are zoned to their neighborhood school that happens to be a charter.
Okay.
And because we are so focused on ensuring that the turnaround of our schools is not about turning out kids, we are tracking really closely both the entry of students in as well as the exit. So when students are exiting our schools, whether they are moving or transferring to another school because it's a better fit, we require exit interviews and documentation to make sure there's no counseling out, as you were implying.
Right. You touched on this at the beginning, but let me come back to it. I get confused. Is the idea that the ASD schools will go through a process under the ASD and eventually, hopefully, maybe be put back into the Shelby County school system? Is that the goal?
That's exactly right. So the idea is that the Achievement School District provides a triage. Right. This is not the intention is not for schools to enter the ASD and to live in the ASD forever. And so this idea of the funding following the students and what the return of the schools looks like is is quite clear. Our charge is to bring schools in the bottom 5% into the ASD, improve them significantly. We need the funds for those students to come with them to be able to do that. And then when they have improved and we have a transition plan in place to return them back to their school districts, they will do that.
But none have gone back yet.
Not yet. So the law says that at least 5 years in the Achievement School District, and then once they meet expectations, a transition
So,
plan
and if one of these
happens.
schools that's under a that's operated by a charter school or a charter operator hits the numbers and you put it back, would it stay with that charter school, or would that be the choice of the Shelby County School District to say, all right, we take back school X, it's been run by this charter operator, we don't want them anymore? Is that your call or the SCS call?
It goes back as a charter, and SCS has the authority to authorize it as a charter school.
And we may be getting ahead, but what happens with the teachers then and so on? Do they stay with that? They stay with that school. Okay, Bill.
And
About 5 minutes left.
are we going to see more discussions around that future coming up now that you've got 3-4 school years under your belt?
Exactly. So at the end of last school year, that was the first point at which we had 3 years of performance for our first 6 cohort of schools, 3 of which we directly operate, 3 are charter operators across the state. And we've begun conversations with the Commissioner of Education and the Superintendent of Shelby County Schools regarding here are some ideas related to how this transition back could look. Because we are very committed to ensuring not only are the schools performing better, but that they continue to perform better and are on that upward trajectory when they return back to their local district.
Mm-hmm. And I think a part of the discussion from what you've said and from what I've heard others say is with the expectation that a return to the conventional school system will not just be, okay, now we'll go back to the way things were. This changes the process going forward.
Oh, absolutely. We can't have the schools improve and then revert back to the way they were 5 years ago and revert back to what I would think would be failure. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that we have put in place the appropriate structures, both internal to the school and around the school within the school district, to be able to continue that success. And that cannot mean returning the school back to the way it was before the ASD was there.
At the outset of this, the Achievement School District came to Fraser, Tennessee. And opened up direct run schools there. That was the focus area because that was where I think all but one of the schools in Fraser were in the bottom 5% at that point. Right. Talk a little bit about the direct run experience in Fraser.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. So we targeted a particular neighborhood for intervention because that was where the highest concentration of priority schools in a particular feeder pattern was, meaning the elementary, middle, and high schools, all but 2 actually were on the priority list in 2012. And we said that if there is any place in the city that the Achievement School District would directly run schools, it would have to be there. And that's where we learned a lot about the kind of community support and assets and resources that are necessary to make this work. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a kind of groundswell of community leaders who have said, we don't want to just be informed about what's happening in these schools. We want to help shape it. And so we're seeing this kind of civic, not civic pride, but civic involvement in the shaping of our schools that I think is exactly what I was talking about earlier in terms of what it means to turn around schools in partnership with local leadership. Mm-hmm. And that only, we have a direct experience with that because we are directly operating schools in a neighborhood such as Fraser.
Let me, just a minute left. I'm sorry, Bill. Just a minute left. The ASD will take over 4 schools next year?
We will bring 4 additional schools into the district next year.
Which ones are those?
So
this has been announced. We're not breaking news here. So,
yes. So Raleigh, Egypt, middle school. I wish I had those on top of my head.
No, that's okay. It really doesn't matter. Actually, but the 4 are set. And,
yes, they're all set.
Chris Barbick, again, your predecessor, would come on the show, and he talked a lot openly about part of it is taking the schools over or putting them into charters, but part of it is bluntly the threat that if you don't get it together, we're going to do this. Is that still a part of the way you approach it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I started this conversation, the role of the ASD is both to directly intervene in the schools through charters and through direct management of the schools. But there's a very significant secondary strategy around being a catalyst for change that is just brought about because we say we are coming or we are going to be here if you aren't turning around the schools yourself.
Right.
And that is what has happened in Shelby County. They've stepped up and said, okay, we've got this. We're going to start focusing on these schools, and they've been quite successful.
And your communication with Dorsey Hobson, you're the superintendent
Yes.
of Shelby County Schools, is this good?
It's very good, and in fact, we're going on a joint learning trip together in a few months in Denver to be able to develop some joint plans together to support schools.
Just a minute left, Bill.
And to go back for a second to the direct run schools, the ASD went into the different apartment complexes that very memorable summer
Yes.
that the
I was there.
ASD prepared to begin. So we now have competition from we have an iZone schools there in Fraser as well. What has that done for what's happened in Fraser? Because you all had parents who basically were saying, when we get to the high school level, I don't know what I'm going to do, and you all had academies and things like that.
Exactly. We had parents saying, what do we do when we finish with elementary and middle school? What are our options? And they asked us to create a high school. So we created our Fraser 9th grade academy, and then we added a charter operator, Fraser Community Schools, to serve Fraser High School in the Fraser neighborhood. Folks were excited to go to that school, and so this competition has created better schools for a great neighborhood.
All right, Malik Anderson, thank you for being here. Bill Dries, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
Support for Behind the Headlines is provided in part by the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and by ePayment America, providing businesses an e-suite of flexible and efficient electronic payment programs through innovative technology, secure transaction processing, 24/7 customer support, and field technicians in the Mid-South and nationwide. Details at 855-927-9925.